Israel has once again changed the rules of the game, and now a detail that no one knew about the strike in Iran can be revealed. On Sunday morning, Tehran and hundreds of sites across Iran are in flames, while senior Revolutionary Guards figures are hiding. Meanwhile, in Israel, it is also a heavy morning as we clean up and recover from last night's ballistic missile attacks, which claimed at least 10 lives, with many more wounded and several still missing. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, bringing you the whole truth about Israel's war against Iran's Revolutionary Guards on day 3 of Operation Rising Lion. A moment before we get into the headlines, I invite you to take a second and hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Let's begin. For nearly 40 hours, the IDF has maintained continuous strikes in Iran after the IDF spokesperson's unit and the chief of staff declared freedom of action in the skies of the Islamic Republic. In western Iran, fighter jets struck an underground site that housed cruise missiles, stocks, and launchers. In Bushehr, a natural gas production facility was hit, causing massive flames that lit up the sky for miles around, as Israel announced it has expanded its list of targets. But perhaps the wildest story from the last 24 hours is the story of how Israeli jets struck fuel and weapons depots in the heart of downtown Tehran. And according to the New York Times, several sites linked to the nuclear program were hit, including test laboratories. The question on everybody's mind is, will it be enough to significantly set back Iran's nuclear weapons program? In the meantime, senior regime figures have also been targeted, as well as the Iranian Defense Ministry and SPND nuclear project headquarters, as Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz posted a simple but profound message that Tehran is burning. However, this is not the end. White House and Israeli officials said that Israel's Rising Lion operation against Iran is expected to last weeks, not days. According to them, the operation is proceeding with United States approval. Israel's security establishment also has a message for Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The nuclear project game is over. And in another message, an Israeli official made an unprecedented remark on ending the war in Tehran, adding, Khamenei's elimination is not off the table. As if to give everybody another reason to take this statement seriously, the IDF also announced that it struck one of the underground missile cities that Iran has posted a propaganda video about in March after eliminating the commanders who appeared in the videos earlier in the campaign. The squadron commander who led the strike said, "We took off for a nation historic and complex mission on Iranian soil." And speaking of complex missions, Iran's intelligence chiefs was also eliminated in the last 24 hours, and we'll bring you all the details about the senior figures taken off the board so far. The IDF confirms that over 20 senior commanders of the Iranian regime have been eliminated, along with the dead Gholam Razeh Marhabi, who's considered Iran's top intelligence officer. And also terminated was the commander responsible for most surface-to-surface and long-range cruise missiles. All of this has been made possible because Israel and the United States performed a classified upgrade to the Israeli F-35s that enabled the strike in Iran with no aerial refueling and no loss of stealth. Experts call this a game changer in combat aviation. And speaking of which, President Donald Trump holds a weapon that will end this game. After the IDF's impressive opening strike in Iran, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has one major mission: to persuade United States President Donald Trump to enter the campaign and dispatch the United States Air Force's 5 strategic B-52 bombers. They are able to deliver the firepower that can bring this conflict to a swift and successful conclusion. On that note, I'm happy to report to you that in Iran, there are rumors that the Revolutionary Guards have already collapsed and are fleeing for their lives. There is chaos in the streets of Iran and major cities on social media as it lights up with voices hinting the beginning of the regime's collapse in Iran. Young Iranian women in Tehran are saying things like, "We pray that Israel keeps eliminating leaders and our nightmare ends." I could not agree more. However, Israel's main goal right now is to hit the nuclear threat and also the ballistic missile threat, not to topple the Ayatollah regime, at least for now. And senior figures are already threatening Supreme Leader Khamenei, and Tehran hopes to wear down Israel's home front, but Jerusalem warns that the Iranians are playing with fire. And meanwhile, the United States, for the most part, watches from the sidelines, and it's not the only one. But back home in Israel, Sunday morning is heavy with sadness and mourning after counting the casualties from last night's missile strike on civilian neighborhoods of our cities. There is also renewed fears as reports emerged that for the first time Iran fired missiles at us that have the ability to maneuver in flight aviating air defensive systems. Perhaps because of this, there were at least 10 fatalities last night, and that number might rise as many more were wounded and some are still missing. Most of the casualties are in the city of Bat Yam, where a missile scored a direct hit on a residential building, and in the Arab-Israeli village of Tamra in the Galilee, where another private home was hit, resulting in 4 fatalities. It's important to point out that these missiles being fired at us by Iran are much bigger and more powerful than anything that Hezbollah or Hamas ever fired at us. The warheads on these missiles include several hundred kilograms of industrial-strength high explosives. However, a home front command officer lamented that if the residents of these buildings were hit had managed to get to a protected space in time, they probably would have survived. But there is hope that this will not go much longer, as Iran's proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are not functioning. Iran's ring of fire, which they spent years building up and which Israel spent months knocking down, is now barely operating. The proof of that has come in this campaign, which is entering its 3rd day, and these proxies, which Iran built up to protect them from this very situation, are not stepping up like they were supposed to. So TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us some insights into this and all the behind-the-scenes diplomatic details about what happened in the Putin-Trump meetings, the United States position, and how this offensive will continue. And meanwhile, Israel continues to fight on other fronts, even as the main effort is now on Iran. And parallel to interceptions after Iran launched another salvo towards the north last night, reports emerged of a targeted assassination of a senior Houthi militia figure. We're still awaiting final confirmation, but if successful, this is a dramatic development. In the north, Hezbollah remains quiet, but in Gaza, Hamas continues fighting in order to manage a passable escalation on these fronts amidst the campaign against Iran, and the IDF has mobilized thousands of reservists, imposed a closure on Palestinian cities, and raised the alert on all fronts with reinforcements at the northern border. Alongside the heat from the east, fighting in Gaza is in full swing with rocket launchers from the Gaza Strip. It is also my sad duty to tell you that another IDF soldier fell in battle in the Gaza Strip over the weekend. The IDF spokesperson announced that Sergeant Major in Reserve, Noam Shemesh, 21 years of age, from Jerusalem, a platoon commander in Battalion 92, Kfir Brigade Infantry, fell in the battle in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 3 of the direct war with Iran's Revolutionary Guards and day 620 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups operating in this region under the orders of the Revolutionary Guards, who at this very moment are getting what they deserve for all the evil that they spread in this world. We start today's report in the coastal city of Bat Yam, south of Tel Aviv, where a direct hit on a residential building left 6 people dead and many more wounded. The city of Rehovot is a suburb of Tel Aviv and was also hit hard, and rescue crews struggled to reach people who were trapped under the rubble of destroyed buildings. And a few hours before the strikes on these coastal cities, a family home in the Arab-Israeli village of Tamra in the Galilee was hit by a missile, leading to 4 fatalities and many more wounded amongst the family that lived in this house. Altogether, there were at least 10 fatalities and 200 people that were wounded, including several children, and many more were still missing as of Sunday morning. At the same time, the Houthis in Yemen claimed to have fired 2 ballistic missiles at Israel, but the IDF said that they had not had time to notice. In any case, no Houthi missiles managed to penetrate Israel's air defensive systems in the last 24 hours. Alerts of UAV infiltrations were also issued, and most cities in Israel have canceled school for the rest of the week, while most businesses are closed and most government agencies are running on an emergency footing. In Iran, the situation is much more difficult. The IDF announced early Sunday morning that it had completed a wide wave of strikes in Tehran against infrastructure of Iran's nuclear project. This is including the Defense Ministry headquarters, the SPND headquarters, and fuel depots. The IDF noticed that the targets are tied to the effort to obtain nuclear weapon and that the strikes were carried out with intelligence guidance. In fact, a senior Israeli official told the Wall Street Journal every target to disrupt the nuclear program is on the table, including Khamenei himself. Okay, so what is happening in Iran? Where is the IDF reaching and where is it attacking? Here is a special boots-on-the-ground report of all the situation. The IDF spokesperson announced later on Sunday morning that the Air Force has completed another strike wave in western Iran against infrastructure for storing and launching missiles. The IDF also published footage of a strike on a surface-to-surface missile launcher in Iran during the night. In Iran, they were also making announcements. One such announcement came from the IRGC to the effect that it had, for the first time, fired an advanced ballistic missile. And according to the announcement, which came in the form of a report in the semi-official Fars news agency, this is the Hajj Qassam guided missile fired during the night in the waves of strikes between Saturday and Sunday. It is named after Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds force who was eliminated in a United States strike in Iraq several years ago. According to official statements in Tehran, it is a guided ballistic missile with solid fuel and a range of 1,200 kilometers and a maneuvering warhead intended to penetrate defense systems like Patriot and the American THAAD deployed here in Israel to help us defend against these missiles. So the Iranian Defense Ministry declared that the missile can cope with Israel and with the United States multi-layered defensive systems. Whether any of this is true is an open question at this point, but even if it is true, I think this new missile will be too little, too late to save this regime from defeat. Operation Rising Lion entered its 3rd day on Sunday morning and has already been a spectacular success, with the largest strike so far coming late Saturday evening. In the action, which was carried out in parallel to the heavy salvo that Iran fired at Israel, the Air Force fighter jets struck dozens of targets in less than an hour. Amongst the targets struck was a central fuel terminal in the city, weapon stockpiles, and more. Iranian figures were also in the sites, and according to the assessments, some were eliminated. Iran's oil ministry admitted that the IDF struck 2 fuel facilities in Tehran, and Iran published footage from the fires inside its capital. Defense Minister Israel Katz, who promised that in response to the Iranian fire at civilian targets in the missile salvos that Tehran would burn, he wrote a brief comment on social media network X saying Tehran is burning. And meanwhile, in the New York Times, it was reported that two sources said that during this round of strikes in Tehran, the IDF struck several cities in the capital that are connected to Iran's nuclear program, amongst them experimental laboratories. In addition, they said that the IDF struck the Shah Rai refinery in South Tehran, which is one of the largest in Iran, and according to the Tasnim news agency, emergency teams are working there and trying to control the fire. And residents reported powerful explosions at several energy and fuel installations in Tehran and its surroundings, causing a wave of anxiety and fear in the city. IDF spokesperson Brigadier General Efi Defrin gave an update late Saturday night on the strikes in Iran and emphasized that more than 70 fighter jets struck in Iran and created area freedom of action, saying Tehran is no longer immune. The road has been paved. These remarks echo those of the Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, who in the past 24 hours met with air crews and technicians from Tel Nov base who are taking part of the strikes in Iran. And during his remarks to these air crews, he said, "We are paving the way to Tehran. You are dealing with an unprecedented strategic threat to the state of Israel. I get confidence from you, from the pilots, from the senior commanders of the Air Force, and from our intelligence people. I visited all the Air Force bases and saw the pilots who gave me the confidence that we can set out." This is a good time to point out that Israel has defined two goals to this campaign in Iran. One is hitting the nuclear weapons and destroying the threat, and the second is hitting the Iranian ballistic missile threat. In Israel's view, these are two existential threats that left no choice but to confront them head-on after decades of international efforts that included sanctions, United Nations Security Council resolutions, and endless negotiations in which the Iranians did what they know best, which is stall for time. And amidst all of this, the two threats continued to intensify, and the decision to act was made for a simple reason. Israeli officials were determined that we are nearing the point of no return. Now, there is a rampant speculation, including amongst some very serious geostrategic analysts, that Israel's goal is also to topple the Ayatollah regime. However, Israel emphasized that this is not the objective of the operation, but at the same time making it obvious that if this happens, no one will be sorry about it. In fact, on Saturday evening, statements began to emerge to the effect that Israel is no longer ruling out elimination of Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, as it has already eliminated so many of his henchmen. In other words, Israel is dominating Iran's regime so far in this war and pounding away at all its senior leaders and strategic assets almost without resistance. The only thing that the Iranians can do against the Israeli actions, which have been ongoing for more than 48 consecutive hours, is hit Israel's home front. They have no air force that can face the Israeli air force, and they have no air defensive capabilities because it has already been systematically destroyed. As a side note, the Iranian air defensive system is built around Russian-built equipment and technology, and in Russia, there is a lot of chatter right now about how useless it was against the Western-built planes and missiles. I think this is something that the whole world will take note of, but that's a subject for a different podcast. In the end, what remains of Iran's ability to harm Israel is the ballistic missile power that Tehran has built over the years in awareness of its limitations in other fields. However, over the years, Israel developed a very high-quality answer to the missile threat through various air defensive systems, while admitting that there is no 100% defense, and the harsh results were seen in the past day with casualties in Rishon LeZion, in Tamra, in Bat Yam, and in Ramat Gan in Israel. And all of that raises an important question. Are the Iranians intentionally hitting Israel's home front? Let me know in the comments what you think. Surprisingly, the answer is apparently no. they are trying to hit military and intelligence bases that are in Tel Aviv and other major cities, as in previous Iranian attacks in October and in April, when they fired most of the missiles at military targets. The Iranians are taking a risk because the moment they disregard considerations of hitting the population, they can lead to an Israeli response that will be severe. In Israel, they say the Iranians are playing with fire. Nevertheless, Jerusalem admits we have no ability to topple the regime in an operation. A regime can be toppled in a campaign between powers. This is a country of 100 million people with an area 63 times bigger than Israel. The dimensions must be understood. Perhaps because it is obvious that there is an imbalance in power between Israel and Iran, NBC reported on an Israeli request for the United States to join the operation, but it is not yet clear how the Americans will respond, if at all. In any case, Israel is not pressuring Washington so that the world will not accuse us of fomenting war, while President Trump, at least declaratively, says that he still wants a new nuclear deal with Tehran. And in a related story, CNN claimed in recent hours that the Israeli action in Iran is expected to last weeks, not days, and it is progressing with indirect approval from the White House, and this is according to sources in Washington and Jerusalem. And according to an Israeli source that is quoted by the American network, the Trump administration has not expressed reservations about the expected duration of the operation in internal discussions. A White House source noted that the administration is aware of the Israeli plans and supports them implicitly, and when asked about the length of the fighting, the source said it depends on Iran's response. The source elaborated by saying that the administration firmly believes that the issue can be resolved throughout continued negotiations between the United States and Iran, adding that the United States will not dictate to Israel how to act, except for its right to defend itself. In other words, the Trump administration believes that the Iranians should take a look at the tremendous damage that they're sustaining and their helplessness to stop it, and also to accept the American offer of a negotiated end to the Israeli attack. They seem to think that this is the best way to ensure that Iran does not have a viable path to a nuclear weapon. Guys, do you agree with this? Let me know in the comments. And in any event, Israel has been pleasantly surprised at the way that Hezbollah in Lebanon has not attacked Israel in order to distract it from the campaign against Iran. That was the whole reason that Iran set up Hezbollah in the first place. But according to an Israeli intelligence assessment, Hezbollah has been so weakened by Israel's campaign against it in the last 10 months that they do not want to put their money on the losing horse. However, it is warned that this could still change with Tehran pressuring the Shiite terrorist organization in Lebanon. And once again, guys, leave a comment on this video if you think that Hezbollah is being smart, strategic, or if they're just desperate to survive and don't want to give Israel an excuse to finish them off. In any case, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development on the subject, so keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, do not forget to help us create more videos like this one that will share what's happening in Israel so that the world will know the truth and will know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So in order to help us, please visit www.tbnisrael.com/give or hit the donate button here on YouTube and help us reach the world with what's going on in Israel. Now, I want to turn to TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani, who will give us a full perspective on the region's diplomacy.
It is hard to overestimate how substantial and historical the last 48 hours have been in this part of the world. And let me break it down. If you're new to this news channel and are new to what's been happening in the Middle East, Israel has been striking deep in the heart of Iran time and time again for multiple days straight. At the same time, the Iranian regime has been striking against Israel, firing hundreds of ballistic missiles against the people of Israel. And I think the big question in everyone's mind, myself included, is where do we go from here? This is a conflict that was supposed to be Israel and then other allies of Israel attacking the Iranians, But so far it's mostly been, or only been, Israel attacking Iran and Iran retaliating only against Israel directly. And this is important because we were expecting this to be a more regional scaled operation. Well, here's what we know. On the night of the 14th of June, Iran retaliates with more than 200 missiles launched at Israel. The next night, which is this last night, it's a smaller number, but at a greater cluster that caused considerably more damage within Israel proper. Here's where it gets interesting. The Iranian government in recent days has lost an incredibly substantial number of its leaders of the IRGC, leaders of the military, leaders of the, let's call it the research program, which is their push at a nuclear bomb. And many of these people were the shot callers, the people at the head of programs, and the people who the government and the top supreme leader were turned to when they had questions. And these people are no longer with us. They're no longer at the table. And that leaves the Iranians in a really precarious situation. It's also been very different for Israel. We were expecting a much larger number of missiles on day one, and that didn't happen, probably likely tied into the number of assassinations and the fact that the Iranians sort of lost much of their chain of command and severely were bombed during those first days. But what seemed to be a maybe day-long operation is now extending into more than that. And I expect, and I think all signs are indicating, that this is going to draw out for longer. Israel has been striking consistently with greater time, with greater efficacy into Iran proper, and will continue to do so, it seems, for days to come at this point. And the Iranians have no plan to stop retaliating against Israel and seem to have no plans of stopping that either. And even though there have been dramatic casualties, including strategic casualties on the Iranian side, they're clearly not broken and plan to continue retaliating against Israel. So where are we going next? One, there's been an expectation for the US to enter the game or to enter this conversation in a more dramatic manner, which we haven't seen yet. And at this point, I'm not sure we're going to see it. We've seen support. I think there's been aid in defense of Israel by the US government, but not in the way we were expecting. We also expect the Iranians to continue to bombard Israel. They have a stockpile of at least several thousand missiles, according to multiple foreign sources, that they're planning to continue using against the people of Israel. And they've only used several hundred of them, let's say 300 max in the last couple of days. So there's many more in their arsenal that they could use against Israel, saturating our air defenses, depleting our stockpiles of defense missiles. So again, this is not over yet, and there's more to go here. At the same time, an initial effort at diplomatic efforts at fending off or finishing this conflict have also been underfoot in a dramatic sense. The US has been pushing the Iranians time and time again repeatedly. Guys, come to the table. If you don't come to the table peacefully, you'll be brought to the table under fire, which is where we're at right now. Reach an agreement where we eliminate your stockpiles of enriched uranium and, importantly, your ability to manufacture. Now, mind you, one might say that Israel's already eliminated their ability to continue enriching uranium. But again, reaching an agreement now under fire might be a good thing for everyone involved, especially if it leaves Iranians without the ability to defend themselves or to push for a bomb. But there's other diplomatic efforts underway that are also notable. The Russians specifically have been talking time and time again about ending the violence and ending Israel's aggressions. I mean, you gotta love the language that they're using here. Ending their aggression against the Iranians, but they've been an intermediary that has been trying to sort of get their foot through the door and try to barter some kind of deal here, probably to gain power and influence once more in this region. And the Iranians, interestingly, haven't actually indicated that they're interested in that kind of agreement. They've been very bold in their language, saying they're coming after Israel full speed, full power, and are going to retaliate to what was done to them. But when it comes to the perception of their power, what they're able to do, where they're going as a government, they've been dealt a blow that they're going to take years and possibly decades to recover from. You don't lose your top echelon, both militarily and in civil life, and specifically when it comes to the flagship, prestigious project of the nuclear program, and not take a beating in publicity and in perception of power and stability, both internally and externally. And that's exactly what's happened to the Iranians in recent days. Let me remind you that Israel has maintained air dominance undeterred, unbothered over Iran without taking a single hit. We're talking about thousands of sorties at this point, time and time again, bombing deep into Iran, all of them without any substantial resistance by the Iranians. There's a lot of intelligence that went into that. There's an incredible skill level of the Israeli pilots themselves, but also this indicates the weakness that has been exposed in Iranian defenses. So here's what we expect to see in the days to come. We expect to see more of the same. Israel dealing dramatic blows to the Iranians. According to what we know, we've only destroyed between 30 to 50% of their enrichment facilities, so the centrifuges and all the supporting and logistical facilities that go around that. And because of that, there's a lot more air work, I should say, or ground work, depending what angle you look at this from, to be done in Iran. So Israel's going to continue bombing. The Iranians are going to continue retaliating. They're probably very emboldened by the fact that in recent days, they've been able to bring a casualty tally within Israeli society. There have been multiple Israelis killed and dozens injured, and also the images are something the Iranians would probably be very proud of, at least in a limited number, of finally being able to penetrate some of Israel's air defense, although at a very small percentage of the total projectiles they've sent over to this country. We're going to see a doubling down of diplomatic efforts on Iran and on Israel at the same time by the Russians, by the French, by the US to try and reach an agreement that sort of freezes the situation all in all. But what I think is going to end up happening is multiple more days of these rounds. Israel exchanging blows with the Iranians, Israel having the upper hand time and time again, and eventually the Iranians giving into some kind of ceasefire or permanent or temporary agreement where they say we'll leave things as they are. And as they are means Israel's been able to pull the sting out of the Iranian threat. And if you zoom out and look at the last 18 months of warfare, we have taken a regional superpower that has been a top-tier adversary to everyone in this region, and we've eliminated their export of terrorism doctrine, their ring of fire doctrine. We've eliminated most of their proxies in this region, and now we've bombed deep, repeatedly, and effectively within Iran proper, time and time again in a way that has left them licking their wounds. And I think that's the important takeaway from here. The war is far from over, the diplomatic efforts are only getting started, but Iran has been dealt a blow they're not recovering from anytime soon. Israel has gained air superiority and also perception superiority against the Iranians, and things in this region, note my words, are never going to be the same again. Now back to Yair Pinto.
So thank you very much, Mati, for the order that you brought into this chaos. If you're still watching, give a click to the subscribe button if you haven't already, and follow us to help us spread the truth of what's happening in Israel. Most importantly, pray for the situation. Now, let's continue. It was a long night without much sleep for any of us here in Israel. And this morning, as the sun started to rise, we learned that there were several dead and wounded from last night's attacks, as well as heavy damage in the Gush Dan region of central Israel. Israeli leaders knew when they launched Operation Rising Lion that this could happen and Israel's civilian population would be under fire. For understandable reasons, the IDF is releasing information sparingly and at low resolution about the course of the fighting and the targets hit in Iran. But even after filtering out the fake news on social media networks and in the world press, one can definitely conclude that the offensive is being carried out according to the ordinary plan as it was designed and prepared in the IDF and the Mossad for years. The Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, calls it a fateful campaign, adding that history will not forgive us if we do not seize the strategic opportunity. There will be more hard days, and we are preparing for that because we are dealing with a regional power. They do not break and will not break easily, and we will have to persist for some time to destroy their capabilities, to prevent nuclear weapons and missiles from Iran. As you probably already know, the opening blows in this campaign were delivered by the Air Force and the Mossad and their fighters on the night between Thursday and Friday against a varied mix of targets whose destruction was given top priority in the preliminary planning. These were targets which could only be destroyed in the element of surprise, and that was happened, and they also required very precise, very expensive munitions. These munitions are launched from long range with the aircraft far from the reach of Iranian air defensive systems. These targets included decapitating the operational security, the leadership, and the scientists of the weapons group, who are engaged in developing and producing the explosive triggering device and the nuclear warheads themselves. Other targets of those initial strikes included surface-to-surface missiles and UAV launchers that the Iranians, who had prepared for the attack, had deployed in order to deliver an immediate counterstrike. Israel anticipated that an immediate counterstrike would happen and even sent the population down to the bomb shelters at 3 a.m. on Friday morning in case it came. But in the end, the counterattack did not come for many more hours. And meanwhile, the two nuclear facilities at Natanz and Isfahan were also hit. At Natanz, uranium is enriched to a level that can serve as fissile material for the atomic bomb, and at Isfahan, the highly enriched uranium gas is reconverted into solid uranium metal, which is the core of the explosive device of a nuclear warhead. The hit on Natanz was important mainly to demonstrate to the Iranians and to the world that Israel is determined to damage the nuclear program, fundamentally so that it will take years for it to recover. But the truly important act and critical hit was the industrial facility in Isfahan, because Iran has already accumulated about 450 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, which can be enriched within a few days to 90%, and from it produce nuclear explosives and other cores for about 15 bombs. The power of each such bomb equals that was dropped on Hiroshima in World War II, which killed hundreds of thousands. So according to Israeli intelligence assessments, the Iranians had only just begun the conversation of the enriched uranium gas back to solid form at the plant that was hit in Isfahan. Had Israel allowed them to continue unhindered, they would have produced nuclear explosive cores of uranium and other uranium metal and materials that needed for this bomb that within a few months would already have been installed in warheads for missiles. The Iranians long ago obtained old Pakistani and Chinese design enabled the production of nuclear warheads almost without delay. However, the strike on the conversion plant in Isfahan created a critical bottleneck for the Iranians, preventing them for now and for a considerable period of time from using the huge quantity of nearly weapons-grade enriched uranium that they have accumulated, and from producing explosive devices and nuclear warheads that would constitute an existential threat to Israel and to the countries of this region. Israeli and American security officials say that an assessment of the damage that the Israeli Air Force caused to the conversion facility in Isfahan shows that the plant will be disabled for a very long time. Hence, the immediate danger that Iran will break out to a bomb within a few months has for the time being been removed. One may assess that the damage to the plant alongside the elimination of the weapons group scientists is the most important achievements of the ongoing blow delivered by Israel in Operation Rising Lion so far. But this is not the end of the story. The blow to the military nuclear development and the production array is still to come. The goal is to push the nuclear program back by years and then move to the diplomatic channel. That is to enable the Americans to conduct negotiations on the nuclear agreement that will be acceptable to Israel. That's the geostrategic big picture stuff. Now let's move on to something of more immediate concern to ordinary people like you and me. The second most dangerous threat that the IDF and the Mossad set out to remove is Iran's array of ballistic and cruise missiles and long-range UAVs. Besides the missiles that it already has, Iran planned to produce thousands more heavy, modern, long-range ballistic missiles with which saturate Israel's defensive arrays so that some would penetrate and inflict enormous losses and damage. A small fraction of the heavy ballistic missile that Iran already possesses and those it planned to produce have warheads that can maneuver independently at hypersonic speed, allowing them to evade interceptors' missiles. So the potential damage from such weapons is immense, and we have seen in the last 48 hours how even a few heavy missiles can cause immense material damage to our home front here in Israel. In this context, one must understand that the most important data point determining how many ballistic missiles will explode on Israeli soil is not the number of missiles that the Iranians have, but the number of mobile and flexible launchers from which they are fired, alongside the number of crews who know how to operate those launchers. For example, if Iran had 3,000 heavy ballistic missiles in storage, but only 100 serviceable launchers of all types, then even under the best conditions and with maximum operational effectivity, they cannot launch more than 100 ballistic missiles to Israel's in a single salvo. So producing these launchers is no simple or cheap matter, and therefore the Iranians have only a few hundreds of them, and several have already been destroyed, and more will be destroyed as the fighting continues. Getting back to the air campaign against Iran's tyrannical regime, the IDF has confirmed that it eliminated the head of the Intelligence Directorate of the Armed Forces and the commander of the IRGC surface-to-surface missile array in Iran in the opening blow of the operation in the country. This is probably one of the main reasons that Iran's counterstrikes have been so small and took so long to come. The head of the Intelligence Directorate of the Armed Forces, Gholam Razeh Marhabi, was responsible for the regime's intelligence assessment and was considered the most senior intelligence officer in Iran. Marhabi took part in assessments, intelligence preparations, and the management of attacks against Israel in the past year and before. He was also a very significant and highly respected senior figure within the Iranian regime and close to the Armed Forces Chief of Staff, Mohammad Hussein Bakeri, who was also terminated. The commander of the ballistic missile array in the IRGC Air Force, Mohammad Bagheri, was responsible for most of Iran's surface-to-surface and long-range cruise missile capabilities, which constitute a central threat to the state of Israel. To circle back to a topic that we touched on earlier in this report, after the Iranian missile and UAV attack on Israel, the Home Front Command continues to analyze the events and to warn against public complacency. A senior Home Front Command official referred to the civilian deaths in the past 24 hours on Saturday afternoon and stated that the deaths of 3 citizens could have been prevented if they had been inside a protected space. On Saturday evening, 4 women, including a mother and her 2 daughters, aged 13 and 20, were killed by an Iranian missile that hit a building in the Arab-Israeli village of Tamra. The 4th fatality was also from the same family, a relative of the mother. And the victim of this Iranian attack were named as Manar El-Qassam Abu Kheja Tatib and her 2 daughters, Khala and Shada, and the relative Manar Diab Khatib. Later, on Sunday morning, Magen David Adom issued a statement that altogether 10 people were lightly wounded and 10 anxiety casualties were treated. Impacts were also identified in the Haifa area and other locations throughout Israel. At Rambam Hospital, to which some of the wounded were evacuated, they updated that altogether 14 wounded and 8 anxiety casualties were received. This is in addition to the salvo of ballistic missiles which hit the coastal city of Bat Yam last night, resulting in 6 fatalities, including children. Around 200 other people were wounded in these strikes and several were missing. The city of Rehovot was also struck in this attack, which saw the most difficult night in Israel since this war began. So we will continue to pray for the victims, for their families, and for all who were hurt by these attacks on Israel by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. However, while the battle against the IRGC rages, there is still action on other fronts, and we'll take a look at that now. Following the launch of Operation Rising Lion in Iran on the night before Thursday and Friday, the IDF significantly increased readiness on all fronts and transferred thousands of reinforcement troops to the northern borders and to the seam line. Thousands of reservists were called on emergency orders, mainly to critical arrays in the Air Force, the Home Front Command, Northern and Central Commanders, and military intelligence and other units. The IDF sources said that situation assessments were held on all fronts, within which it was decided to reinforce forces, accumulate order of battle, and maintain high offensive readiness. In the Central Command, it was decided on Night Watch B across the region, meaning fear of infiltration into a community following specific concrete intelligence. And as a result, a closure was imposed on Palestinian cities, and forces reinforced an order of battle accumulated and protected the Sim area and was strengthening the areas between Israel and the Palestinian territories. In the Northern Command, defense platoons were called up on the border and high readiness was declared as necessary for an offensive, while in the Judea and Samaria Division readiness was increased across all arrays. Defense Minister Israel Katz also declared a special situation on the home front throughout the country, warning that following the preemptive strike against Iran, a missile and a UAV attack against Israel and its citizens and the population is expected in the immediate time frame. These attacks have now come, and throughout Israel, schools are operating by Zoom, just like back in COVID days. Most businesses are also closed, and most government agencies are operating on an emergency footing. But there is also some good news, as Hezbollah still has not joined the campaign, even though it retains thousands of rockets, missiles, and UAVs, mostly funded by Iranian money. The army assesses that Hezbollah would at least carry out sporadic solidarity fire with the Iranians, as it did for Hamas in the starting of this war on the 8th of October 2023. But so far, even this has not happened, and not even a mortar round has been fired by the Shiite terrorist organization from Lebanon towards Israel. Even in its statement condemning the Israeli operation, they did not threaten an attack against Israel. It's important to point out in this context that the internationally recognized government of Lebanon issued a stern warning to Hezbollah to stay out of this fight, and amazingly enough, Hezbollah appears to be making the pragmatic choice to obey this command for now. However, fighting continues in the Gaza Strip, and on Saturday morning, 2 rockets were launched from the Gaza Strip toward Israel, but fell in the fence area. No casualties were reported from this attack, but the 2 IDF soldiers were seriously wounded in battle in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. So a second before we get into all the details in the Gaza Strip, keep sharing the truth, share, and follow us. We must also pay final respects to a hero who sacrificed his life in the defense of Israel over the last 24 hours. His name is Staff Sergeant in Reserves Noam Shemesh, 21 years of age, from Jerusalem, and he served in the Kfir Brigade and was hit by an RPG attack on his position as he was operating under Division 36 in the Khan Yunis area in the Gaza Strip. One of his comrades was wounded in this attack but survived and was evacuated to a hospital in central Israel by helicopter. The incident occurred against the backdrop of intensified fighting in the Gaza Strip, alongside the opening of the major war with Iran and dealing with additional fronts. So guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in this war, and as always, we ask you to join us and keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us, and most importantly, pray. Pray for the peace of Israel, which is in shelters and in protected spaces from missiles that Iran is firing into civilian populated centers. Continue to pray for the safety of Israel's children who have been living in fear for the past 2 years, and pray for our leaders to have wisdom and courage. Pray for our hostages who are held in Gaza. Pray that they return safely to their families soon. Pray for the peace of Israel, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem.